Four Cardinal Virtues.
Four Cardinal Virtues. All right.
Temperance, Prudence, Justice, and Fortitude. Yep. Those are the four.
Temperance, Prudence, Justice, and Fortitude.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I know we don't have time today to go into all of that, but just like give a little brief
overview
of the Four Cardinal Virtues.
Yeah. So one, I'd say I was introduced haphazardly unintentionally by Dan Crenshaw's book Fortitude, which is really good. I believe it came out in March 2020, which was a fascinating time in this country for a book called Fortitude to come out. But it allowed for me to I picked up long distance running thanks to COVID because that was the only thing that was available other than work.
And that's all you do, and lift a little bit of weights.
Lift a little bit,
weights.
Every once in a while. We'll see. Coming for you. So,
welcome it.
Fortitude. Darren Crenshaw wrote that book, and it was incredible. Chapter 3, No Plan B. So I've had my boys read that book, and it's been fascinating listening to them as they're engaged in their difficulties and their athletics or academics, and they're like, I was like, what are you thinking about out there on the mat? And my middle boy was like, no plan B, Dad. And no plan B. And it's been that was an incredible read, but I didn't really know that fortitude was a cardinal virtue. Mm-hmm. And so I just started, kind of Googling what's going on out there in the world of fortitude. And outside of, because Crenshaw's story is phenomenal, and people should read the book. It's a beautiful read. I've bought it for multiple people.
Would you say it's a political book or more of just a book about life?
It's it's just more of a book about life. It's not really. It's about how has he demonstrated fortitude, and how should we as individuals demonstrate fortitude, and how can our culture get some fortitude? Mm-hmm. How could we not be so sensitive? How could we push through difficult topics? Right. How can we, one of the chapters is like sweat the small stuff, and it's like, how can you handle the difficulties that life has on a small scale, and let that stuff work in you, but don't get wrapped around the axle over foolishness.
Well, and a true sign of wisdom is being able to listen to people that you don't necessarily agree with.
And that's where prudence would come in.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that's where prudence would come in, because
cardinal virtue.
Yeah, without prudence, prudence does not exist if the other three don't exist. So it's kind of a fascinating philosophical component where prudence is the proper application of wisdom. Okay? So there has to be this objective standard. There has to be this idea that exists that says we know that there is something that is good, and we know that there is something that is right. Prudence gives us that opportunity to go the right way. But you have to accept some things first to have prudence. And you can't have prudence in a vacuum. It can't just exist on its own.
Okay.
Right? You have to have these other awesome components that are going into it. Mm-hmm. So, and that's where that proper application of that wisdom comes in. And that's, so the way that Crenshaw writes that book definitely leans on the necessity for prudence. Mm-hmm. Is it prudent, right? We don't really talk like that either anymore. Like I don't have a lot of conversations with folks where we're like, hey, I just want to make the prudent decision. Mm-hmm. They're like, well, I just care about how I feel, or care about how it looks. Right? Well, but is it prudent? Is it wise?
Right.
Have I evaluated all of the criteria that could go into this decision and then made a prudent decision? Or have I just blown with the wind? Yeah. So that's where prudence comes into play. And it can be imprudent to make a decision that you really want to make. It may we do that kind of often. Mm-hmm. So it's I wouldn't be
human
here to
nature.
Yeah, it is. But that's where taking that second, and studying philosophy is a beautiful aspect of kind of opening your eyes to, or all of our eyes, really. Because people can it could be prudent for one and not necessarily prudent for the other, depending on a bunch of other factors. So,
I think a cool point you made when I told you I was going to start studying a little bit more Stoic philosophy was, who is the most wise philosopher of them all? Mm-hmm. And
well, St. Thomas Aquinas would say Aristotle, but
sure. But we're gonna go down a different rabbit hole of Jesus now.
Jesus, right?
Not everybody may agree with that, and that's okay.
Okay, right.
But that's our view.
And Stoicism plays its role, but it's
right.
it's just empty.
Stoicism is very empty. If you don't connect it with a spiritual sense of some sort, whatever that may be, it's gonna be very empty.
Right. So my wife is reading. She's doing some grad work at Biola University, and she's studying metaphysics.
His wife's very intelligent, definitely more intelligent than both of us.
100% accurate. And she is dealing with Stoicism within Christianity, and there are times where some within the Christian faith would argue that Paul was practicing Stoicism in his writings, and I don't personally find that to be true, because the way that I understand Stoicism. Well, first of all, I have an issue with like some of their founding. Like Seneca is somebody that people go to often for Stoicism. Marcus Aurelius is somebody that people go to for Stoicism. Neither one of these individuals lived. They forced themselves to live in an environment that lacked.
Right.
But they themselves did not lack anything on their own. So
what do you mean by that?
Well, they were wealthy. They were doing well.
So
Seneca's family was doing quite well. Marcus Aurelius is an emperor.
It's very easy to live minimalistically when you don't have to worry about providing for yourself.
Right. They're imposing it upon themselves. And then Seneca specifically is talking about, kind of the riches that come from the mental riches that come from. And I don't really see that as really helpful to those who actually
are trying to maybe get by.
Now, right. And there is I think it's called the Stockdale course, which was created by a POW, who went on to include Stoicism in there, in the actual, like what it is to be a POW. And so some people have leaned on the meditations of Marcus Aurelius to help within that confine, to help within that environment of a POW. And it was like a toolkit of sorts that they could draw on when you have nothing else.
Well, and the reason for that is, you set goals that then fail, you become discouraged.
Okay, right.
That's the primary reason.
Well, and that's where, and I would argue that's where Fortitude would come in. So that's where it would be interesting to probably hash that out more, but to keep it within the realm of the virtues. Yeah, for sure. The idea of prudence being the right thing, and then having the fortitude to press, right? So you've chosen this path, but it's not necessarily going to be laid out perfectly, and you're going to have some obstacles. You're going to have that fortitude. And there's other books I think you have, one of the books that we had to read in that leadership pipeline was The Obstacle is the Way.
Oh, that's a great book. And I need to go back and read that again.
Right. So that was that's like an example of demonstrating that fortitude. Don't get wrapped around the axle. Demonstrate fortitude, push through. And that has a lot of value in entrepreneurial life. It has a lot of value in a military setting.
Ryan Holiday also has a book called Daily Stoic, which I've got it right over there. I have found that reading that along, like after I do my devotional for the day, right, or read a chapter in the Bible, it's so interesting how so many times, 50% of the time, whatever Stoic I read that day ends up like tying right into what I read in the Bible. And again, not everybody believes in that, and that's fine. But whatever that may be for somebody,
for sure. All truth is God's truth. If there is truth to be found, then it is from a divine source, and that's because we can't truth can't necessarily exist. Like how does one define truth?
Well, obviously, truth does not exist for humans, because if it did,
right.
I don't know if I'm going to go down that rabbit hole just yet.
So we have to be careful.
Maybe 2 or 3 episodes now.
But and then you get into the justice and temperance, right? And justice is such a fascinating, because we really live more in a world that operates not with justice as its key principle. Most of us live something where grace is found more often, at least certainly in personal dealings.
You're saying there's more
we
grace than
forgive.
justice in personal
I think that none of us ever want to hang out with somebody that's 100% justice oriented. We're not going to be really close friends because you're going to make them. We're all
going to screw up,
right? And then that person's going to hold you accountable perfectly, and that's where like when you look at the faith, that's why justice is such an important one because it's the lack of justice by a heavenly Father.
There's only judgment from one, or there can be there can only be judgment from one because that's the only being that's perfect.
Yeah, and then you're correct, and that's how some philosophers have found that there must be a creator, there must be a divine entity, there must be this first mover, this person that exists outside of, because we do have this idea of justice. Where does that come from? And that's
people would say that's I want to say moral law, but I don't think that's it. There's
natural law.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's things that appear to be right. And we all know that's that when you go against that, you have gone against something natural. Yeah. It exists outside of us. And that's a beautiful thing. The final one is temperance. And I like to refer to Jefferson on that because he was famous for having never overconsumed wine or food in front of any guests, and he could have, but that was a demonstration of his temperance, his ability to temper himself, his personality, his attitude, his anger, which there doesn't seem to be an indication that he suffered from that stuff. From some of those character
probably
traits.
because he had temperance around people.
Right. He did.
So
and where John Adams, if we're talking about like the founding fathers of our country, John Adams was like this wild Northeastern guy, Massachusetts, who seemed to be a little bit more aggressive. Like the French didn't want him involved because of his lack of temperance in any diplomatic dealings, but they loved Jefferson. They loved the way he dealt with himself. So there's like those four cardinal virtues. The Catholics have done a great job at helping bring those to us. The Protestants I haven't found a lot of arenas where that conversation is had. But it's definitely a worthy one.
Yeah. Interesting.
Especially with your children, especially amongst ourselves.
Right.
I mean, if we studied those virtues as a culture, we'd probably be a little better off.
Yeah, I would say much better off than where we're at